Well, I guess we'll start off the formal interview with just asking you what got you interested in becoming an adventure photographer. I mean, what drew you to it, and what keeps you interested throughout the years?
Yeah. Um, I think when I was like 17, 18, and what I like call the idealistic times at school, high school in Germany goes until you're 19 roughly. I was very interested in war photography and crisis photography. Um, but I think in the end, when I graduated from high school, I felt too worried to do that to my parents, actually to my family, and instead started studying engineering, mechanical engineering, very German. Um, and I did that for a year, but felt like that wasn't really the thing, and then felt this passion for photography just as a hobby until that point. And I had no contacts whatsoever, but I knew at the time, there was still with the engineering part, I like cars and all. So I just called Porsche, German company building the 911, the sports cars. Just called them and asked, hey, who's the advertising company that you guys are working with? And then I called them and asked, who's the photographer? And then I called the photographer and said, hey, I'm Vincent. I would like to help you, assist you. And he said, well, that's your lucky time, because my second assistant just stopped working. Can you come tomorrow to say hi? So I came, and I became the second assistant of one of the big commercial photographers in transportation. And I worked there for 1.5 years, learning everything about how to work with agencies, how to work with lights and the big equipment in these big productions. But I also felt the desire to have some form of academic degree. So I went back to university, studied economics. And when I was done with that, I knew that I wanted to get back to photography. But I had this passion for the outdoors too. It started with the long hikes and then came climbing and alpinism. So at some point it was like, hey, why not try to join these two passions together? And and that's what I tried. I saw that there is actually a market for it. And but as I didn't know anyone, it was, I think, for the first year, 1.5 years, it was just building a portfolio from scratch, which basically means paying trips to various places yourself, getting in touch with climbers, taking the first nice photos. Once you have the first photos, actually get in touch with the big names of the industry. And actually, once you have shot successfully with one of the bigger names, then the community is relatively small. Like, everyone knows what the other athletes are up to. So if you have a great photo or a series of great photos from one of the big names, then it's really, really easy to get in contact with all the others. At least that was my experience. So that's how, like, the first 1.5 years after university, when I was building up the portfolio, I was actually working in construction, moving company, moving houses and all, like manual work, which was a good experience too, just to finance everything. And then after 1.5 years, it started to really be good. Like, after half a year, Climbing magazine ran a feature about like the best upcoming photographer. That was cool. And it's all these little things that every kind of little achievement you can use to just casually drop in emails when you approach the next bigger client or the next magazine or the next climber. And so as stupid as it sounds, like, having these little pedigrees always helps. And that's how I got into the business. And when you're in touch with the big athletes, then you automatically get in touch with companies that sponsor these athletes, because in the end, they are sponsoring the athletes to get footage too from what the athletes do, to run their advertisement on it. And that's how we've gotten to go to some very, very cool trips and expeditions over the last 4 years. So that's roughly
that's amazing
rundown of how it came.
That's so cool. I mean, it sounds like you had a bunch of other options, going to university for economics and a little bit of time spent with construction and things like that. Was it ever scary taking a step away from sort of the regular path in going into adventure photography? Because I'm sure we have a lot of people in the chat right now that are in sort of a similar position. A lot of our students are graduating soon into kind of, you know, this uncertain world. And so do you have any advice for some of those people, or any experience that you've had transitioning into a different workforce than you originally thought?
Yeah. Well, I think the big question is what you want to do with your life. Like, do you want the comforts of going a path that our first world societies have kind of established, that is the normal course of things, which is high school, university, go to job, work in this job for 3 years, change job, and then do that until you're 65, or like do you feel like you're inspired by that, by the jobs that these careers offer, which can be like, if you're really into engineering and all, then it might be super nice to like work at Porsche or something, do those career paths. But I suspect that a lot of people that are doing your course there, that are attached to the outdoors, feel like that the big companies might not offer these a career that is satisfying in such a way. So the big question is, do you want to make this jump to uncertainty? In my case, I'm coming from a family that is like decently wealthy, did very well in Germany. So I actually never had the financial worries, because I always knew that worst case, I wouldn't be on the streets, which is a big thing. It's a big help, knowing that you have the support of your family, both psychological, emotionally, as well as financially, worst case. But interesting, I also feel like it might help if you don't have that support, because that actually gives you an extra push to really achieve it on your own, maybe against what people say. Like when people say, you will never make it, or do you really want to do these uncertain things? Maybe that's actually a driving force for you to be like, hey, yeah, I'll show you. I'll prove you that is possible. So in my case, I had all the support. I never had to fight against family, friends. Everyone was highly supportive. But I feel like generally, like what's the age of your students, your attendees, like early 20 or something. I think, well, I had the desire to do this university degree first, because I always felt like I want this fallback option. But once I had that, I felt decently free, and I felt like I can now pursue this, give myself 2, 3, 4 years to try that, and I believe you absolutely should. But also after a couple of years, if it absolutely does not work out for various reasons, then maybe that's the time to actually be like, okay, maybe that is not the career that is the right thing for me. So I would just say go for it, but also know that at least in photography itself is only like 10% of the job, because when you're self-employed, you're basically running your own company. So you have to fulfill all the positions that is in a company, from producing the product, which is taking the photo, to marketing it, to legal questions, to sales. All these positions that in bigger companies you have specialized jobs for, you have to all do them, because if you're just outside taking photos, you will die of hunger, because no one buys them. You have to market them, and all that, like from taxes and everything. You're running your own company. And at a Red Bull workshop a couple of years ago, we got the number that the Red Bull photographers on average have 5 to 10% of their working time actually taking photos. Wow. So the rest of the time is actually just business work, just like, yeah, being behind the desk, acquisition, marketing, post-production, selling the stuff, yeah, talking about new projects, all these things. So you have to be aware of that. It's not just the shiny world, because it's so easy to see just on Instagram, oh wow, all these nice places, and I want to experience that and want to take photos of that. But there is a lot of things going on at the desk behind the scenes to actually go to these places.
I think that's pretty true for a lot of things in the outdoors. I know with our program at Outdoor Adventure, a lot of the things people see is our big expeditions, or, you know, just having fun at the climbing tower or whatever that might be. But there's so much that goes on behind that. There's so much planning, there's so much preparation. And so I think it's important that we always keep that in mind. Like, the reality of our world is sometimes a little bit more challenging than what Instagram might show you. So I know we've got some questions from Miguel. Miguel, are you ready to take it over? I've got a couple others if you don't.
Yeah.
Hi, Miguel.
Hi. Hi, Vincent. I also take photos, and I have quite a passion for nature and photography in general. So I think my first question for you would be, like, instead of just taking those like cool pictures that you'll see on Instagram, or taking on an awesome picture, behind your photos there's a story that goes deep into that photograph. So like, how do you feel you're able to tell the story of the people you're photographing through them?
Yeah. Are you talking about a single image or a series of image, like in a magazine spread? Because I feel like in single images, it is really rare that you can actually tell a compelling full story within just one frame. Sometimes you achieve in doing that, but usually, I mean, that's the reason why National Geographic and all usually have their storytelling on based on a couple photos. Usually you need a couple frames for that. Are you talking about landscapes, or are you talking about persons? Because when it comes to people and documenting certain subjects, I feel like, and maybe even landscapes, the first part actually has nothing to do with photography. It is just developing a basic understanding of what you want to photograph there. So when it comes to making a portrait about a family living there, it's about understanding who they are, where they come from, what drives them, what character are they. And once you have built this understanding and trust by them, which I believe is a very, very important part of photography in general, to gather the trust of people, whoever that is on production, or the people you photograph. Once you have built this understanding of who these people are, then you have an idea of how you, as a next step, transport. Sorry, I'm not a native speaker. How you communicate this understanding that you've developed into a photograph. Everything else, I believe, is a lucky shot, which is perfectly fine. Because sometimes you take this photo and you feel like, wow, this actually, in hindsight, has everything in it that I wanted to communicate. But when it comes to like deeper topics, then I believe this understanding of your topic comes first, and then comes the photography. And that is the same. That is the same in video too. It has nothing to do with photography per se. It's just, I guess, a writer or a journalist or something has to go through the same process before actually writing something.
Yeah, thank you. So that's what I was talking about, more of that, not just maybe a single picture, but that series of photographs and that full body of work. And I really like what you say there. And for someone that maybe has never told someone's story, you were saying about how to understand the situation first, or how to know that person and trust them. But what other tips could you give?
I think the trust part, just generally being, I think really the first and most important part about this whole thing is being a good person that people trust. And it's really, I feel like especially in places that are maybe outside the first world, people realize relatively quickly if you are trustworthy or not, if you just want to use them for a photograph or not, because that is something you should always keep in mind. Are you using your subjects for your own success or for your own story, or do you also implement, you know, do you want to do something nice for both of you? And people generally don't like to be used, and you should not like that either. So being a nice person, trustful person that actually is curious about this person, and not just superficially, oh wow, here's a poor kid, this would be a nice photograph aesthetically, and I'm sure it would communicate well in first world magazines or something. Then you would barely scratch the surface, and you would actually use this person for your you would use it maybe for good reasons, but still, but if you actually get in contact and get in talk, and even if that takes a couple of days, getting to know this person, then I'm sure you're doing a much better job in general. So the first and foremost thing is be a nice, good person, and be trustful, like earn trust.
Do you think it's easier to build that trust when you're in an outdoor setting with somebody, like when you're climbing with them? Because I feel like we have a similar viewpoint on that. When we take some of our trips, we need our participants to trust us to lead them. When we're at our climbing tower, we need our participants to trust us there. Have you found that it's easier to build that all-important trust with them while you're in an outdoor setting?
Yeah, I think there's this two different kind of trust that we're talking about now. One is the sort of really physical trust that you have in the alpine or in the climbing scenario, where when you're going through a tough time together, you know, that bonds for life kind of. I think that is similar to what you are talking about now. Like once you're I mean, people have written books about this magical, you know, rope team trust, and there's a lot of stylizing about that in the alpine literature. So that is definitely true. Once you have been in situations where you completely depend on each other, where your life literally hangs from the other one's operation of, you know, have you made a knot correctly, because next 5 seconds I'll put my weight into it, and otherwise I fall 500 meters. The other aspect, so I fully agree with you, the other aspect is earning the trust of people that are not immediately connected to climbing photography, where I was talking more about the cultural aspects of which I believe can be applied to photography. Like if you want to photograph a metal worker in their workshop, or if you want to, it does not matter what subject, generally earning the trust of people comes first before actually taking photos of them. Some solar issues here. And so those are the two points that I would talk about there, but it's absolutely correct. Being in a rope team with someone is a very, very fast and intimate way to get to know them. And at the same time, once you are in this group of people kind of expect that you know what you're doing. Like I'm by no way good enough to go on a like super remote hardcore Pakistan Trango Tower expedition at 7,000-8,000 meters or something. I can't do that. I'm not good enough for that. I'm a photographer first and then climber after. I know my ways around technical climbing, all the rope work and all, but when it gets super hard and super tough, I can't keep up with any of those climbers. But generally, people know that when you're in the scene, you can be trusted to a certain degree. So this base trust is there once you've worked with the first big names. So again, work on your portfolio and then gain the trust of the first bigger names. From then on, it gets easier.
That's awesome. So I was thinking maybe that we switch gears more to what you're currently doing, which is traveling in a van, and what drew you to wanting to do all of this travel? Is there any cultures that you were inspired to go and see? Is there any places? Is it what is it that drew you to getting in a van with your wife and just hitting the road?
Yeah, this is the van, by the way, that we're currently
Wow.
Cool.
that we built over the course of 3 months, and that we have now parked on this beach here in Chile. Put this back. What I felt more and more dissatisfied about over the last couple of years was that the amount of traveling that I did for the photography projects, I was basically living, I think, 6 months of the year outside. Okay, so yeah, 6 months of the year outside my own flat. And the phone is going crazy here right now. Sorry, apologies. So, just on projects, which meant that there was an incredible amount of air travel, which I grew less and less content of when it comes to environmental questions. So, like, if an average project takes, I don't know, like a week, and it was 20 or 30 weeks, then it's already 60 flights that are going in just within 1 year, which is just, you could always argue, hey, we're doing it and we inspire people for the outdoors and we have this greater goal, but in the end you're just polluting like hell. And so I felt more and more drawn to photographing more cultural aspects and political aspects that are connected to outdoors and adventure, but less the sort of hardcore climbing. I feel like there's a time for everything, and I've also felt that I've seen or experienced like all kinds of climbing that there is, from like sport climbing, super hardcore, to free solo, and what it means to me as a photographer to shoot these things, to big walls, and discovered all the fears that come with it, which is one of the main points why I find climbing photography interesting, to actually combat your own fears when you're hanging in these places. So I felt like I experienced most of that, and that I'm drawn to more to culture things, to political topics like inequality, environmental topics like the big lithium battery that we have in the van here. What does that do to the lithium mining in Peru, for example, that we'll pass through? So the idea was, if I don't live in my home for more than half the year anyways, then why not actually become mobile myself? And my girlfriend or wife had the same thought. So we said, hey, let's stop diving into these things on a per project base, and actually interweave this with our own life, so that we're traveling as a continuous drive all through the world, and find these topics everywhere we go, instead of flying to specific points, being there for 1 week, scratching the surface and coming back. And this was one of the big reasons why we said, hey, let's just get a van and drive around the world with it. And we built it ourselves to get a good feel for it, to understand how everything works. And so yeah, now we've come to a stop, but the plan is to continue from Patagonia here all the way to Alaska, and then from Canada ship to Vladivostok in eastern Siberia, and from there go via Mongolia, Kyrgyzstan, the Pamir Highway, etc., back to Iran, Turkey, and then back to Europe. But that's the plan. We'll see how it goes. But and we don't really know how long it will take. Originally, we thought, hey, we can do that in 2 years. We met people that have been long-term traveling that said, 2 years? Are you crazy? This is far too rushed. Take your time. We were like, yeah, but we can't take time forever. But turns out they are right. Traveling, that is, I think, one of the biggest learnings is do a little less, but do that more intense than trying to cram everything into it. So I don't know if this takes 3 years, 4 years. We don't know. We met people that set out to travel for 5 months and they came back after 16 years. So I guess that's a process we'll figure out. We'll definitely come by the US sometime in the process. Probably not in Florida though.
Shoot. Well, on your journey, or looking forward into your travels, is there any culture in a certain place that has really inspired you, either for better or for worse, or that you're really excited to go and see? Is there any just place or culture that has made an impact on you?
Traveling in general, well, I think traveling or being, I guess the term traveling is so broad, but traveling in the sense that you actually dive into other cultures and not just going to Bali for some nice shots. The beauty of that is that you gain an understanding first hand of how people live, what drives them, and a lot of the things you see in the news are, you learn for yourself that things are different than they appear in the news. I remember in 2017, I went to Kashmir on the Indian-Pakistani border, which is considered like a complete no-go area because of the civil unrest there, the Hindu clashing with the Muslims, and Al-Qaeda potentially coming over from Afghanistan. And we were planning to cross the Himalayas from the southern Indian part to the Tibetan plateau. And I was really scared, and I was like, what happens? But when we came there, we were dropped off by a jeep at the end of the road, and then hiked for 6-7 days into a valley up until the first pass. And we had already set up our tents when there was 3 guys with Kalashnikovs coming to our tent in the middle of nowhere, like Himalayan nothing, and made very obvious that we should come along. And we were very reluctant, and obviously didn't like what we saw there all too much. So we tried to stay away, but there was no chance. We had to come along. So after a while, we came after them, and turns out they led us a couple of 100 meters higher, where their nomadic families had a camp, and they invited us for dinner. And and these people looked like straight textbook, what you see in the media. And I'm, in hindsight, ashamed of all the prejudice we have because of the imagery we see in media in general, and the brain tends to simplify things. And media definitely tends to simplify things. But making these experiences yourself, how kind and nice and caring and helpful and supportive most people are all over the world. It does not matter what culture, religion, or civilization they are in. That is, I believe, the biggest learning, and that is something that traveling is really worth traveling for. And I would hope that that some politicians in this world would actually make similar experiences before condemning lots of parts of the world way too early. And so I'm really looking forward to these honest, real moments everywhere in the world. And it does not matter if that is here with the gauchos in Patagonia. It does not matter if that is with a farmer somewhere in Utah, or with Mongolian tribe somewhere in the desert Gobi. You see this kindness and the character and soul of humanity in so many places on earth, if you just look, and if people take the time to let you look. So that to me is actually worth it, because it broadens your own horizon. And photography in this sense gives is not only a shield. The camera is not only a shield that behind which you can hide, but it's also a door opener, both for yourself and for others. And that's, I think, the most beautiful thing about photography, in the way that I see it, is that it triggers you, it forces you to get yourself into situations and photograph situations, and to learn about situations that you might otherwise never have done. And you you always learn from that and broaden your horizon. And photography really helps with that. So that's what I love about photography.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think we're going to move on a little bit to some of the questions that we have from our students here. And so we're going to facilitate this the same way that we did last week. If you just want to type something into the chat to let us know that you have a question, and then you can unmute yourself and then ask Vincent. If you guys want to type something into the chat, that'd be great.
I am going to throw it over to Sam. Sam Comer, if you're ready. I know you sent me a bunch, so I'm going to let you take it away first, if that's okay.
Yeah, so how are you doing, by the way?
Sorry, what?
How are you doing, by the way? How's it going?
In general now, or just
in general? How's life? How's the social distancing, everything like that?
We are very grateful and happy for where we have actually gotten stuck.
Nice.
The farmers and how everyone here is super supportive. There is no corona cases in the entire area, and they are really testing hard here. I was quite surprised. So being able to help on the fields here, doing something to give back to the local society here is something really nice. And people are so caring. Like there seems to be a social healthcare program in Chile that the poor families get a food basket, something like this, delivered once a week. And people here in the village actually said, hey, we should make sure that these travelers that are stuck here get this food basket delivered. You know, this is the spirit. And we are, like, compared to the average income here, we are super rich. So we are absolutely not dependent on any of this.
Right.
And we would never accept that. But it just shows the spirit of how people treat us here.
Right.
And that is something that I have experienced in lots of places that are not immediately rich first worlds, that people care for each other much more than we are used to in the first world. Because the richer you get as a society, the more distanced you are from each other. And here, this helping each other and not looking at the clock, hey, I helped you for 1 hour now, so you have to help me tomorrow for 1 hour.
Mm-hmm.
Here's just, if someone needs help, people help. And that is something very nice.
So to kind of get back to, like, my questions as far as what I had talked to Kat about. So I assume, like, a lot of us have kind of thought about, like, the van life, but obviously we haven't made it a reality yet. So I assume you've done, like, you did your research before getting going, of course, but, like, what were some of, like, the things that you didn't see a lot of, like, being said to, like, expect, and then, like, once you got into it, you're kind of like, oh, this is what I wish I would have known this before getting into it. Were there any of those kind of things that you were not really sure of, and then once you got into it, you're like, okay, I wish I would have known this?
I think the biggest takeaway, I think what most people struggle with van life is actually the minimizing, because people try to cramp an entire 100 square meter flat into the 6 square meters or something that we have in the van here, which is doomed to fail, because the space is just not enough to have all the amenities you're used to.
Right.
But my wife and I, we have the experience from long hiking trails that we actually don't need that much. So that was not a big issue. What I feel for myself, the biggest learning is actually how much longer everything takes. And that is specifically when you're traveling abroad. Because when you're at home, you wake up, you have your bed that you just, it's fixed, you move out of your bed, go to the kitchen, have a coffee, water is running, hot water is there, you take a shower, everything's working, everything's there. Then you have perfect high-speed internet and a big display to work on your stuff. So like half an hour after you woke up, you're already at the desk working. And that was something that I felt here on this trip, especially when you're traveling to different countries. In every country, you have to relearn what's all the mobile phone providers. Where do I get data? Where do I get water? Where do I get fresh water? Everything takes much longer, And that is something that in the beginning, I think, especially being German and especially, you know, being very, that I had to get used to. For Lina, Lina is Brazilian. For her, it was, I feel like, much easier. But getting used to the fact that you are less productive just from the time, well, maybe productive is the wrong word, but you have less time available to actually do the work you want to do. But maybe the fewer hours that you actually have, I feel like I spend them more productive actually. Because if you don't have fast internet all the time, you have much less distractions. Or if like now here we have fast internet, but we pay quite a bit for it. So you don't procrastinate. There's not every time Photoshop takes 10 seconds to save, it's not a quick look at YouTube or Instagram or whatever. You're just you're coming down to being more focused on your work, and that is something I struggled with a lot in the time before. That there is distractions everywhere, and there is definitely much less distractions now, which is really good, and that might just apply to something like friends asking in the evening, do you want to come over for a beer? And 10 beers later, you know that the next day is not as productive anymore. Right. So you have less time, things take much longer, but the time you actually spend working, I feel, is more productive.
Yeah. That's like, I hadn't even thought about like the whole Wi-Fi situation. So I'm glad that you had said that, but it definitely, and I think with like the whole like social distance quarantine, it's kind of put everybody's lives on hold as far as like the whole like slowing down and having to not worry about like being as efficient, like you said, like and busy. So that's an interesting point you made as far as like you feel more productive now because you're not as used to having everything there then and now. So I like that. I do have a couple other questions. They are kind of related to climbing situations that you've been in. So I saw that you went on a trip to Mallorca with Magnus. So like whose idea was that? Was it yours or was it his? And then what was like your favorite memory from like that trip?
That was Magnus's idea. And that was actually in the very beginning when we got to know each other. Because I had never met him, and I only knew his Instagram, and I felt like, he seems to be a fun guy. And especially back then, his Instagram account was, I think he was just younger, you know, he has grown up too, but he did lots of, you know, funny dorky stuff. And I was like, hey, that seems to be a good guy to take photos with, because the climbers that are super focused on just their project, you can take photos of that project, but you're not supposed to disturb. And the beauty about Magnus is that he is super strong, but he values the impact of good photos for reach and for publicity, and he's just enjoying, you know, to do whatever stuff. So when I say, hey, it would be nice if you would be there, then he looks at it and he's like, yeah, okay, cool, I can do that. So it's very good to work with him in that way. But that was so I contacted him, and he said, there's this cool rock arch there on Mallorca, you know, deep water soloing with Espontas. And I have actually until then never seen the Chris Sharma King Lines video, so I was like, okay, cool, sounds good. Flights are super cheap from Germany, so he said, let's meet there next week or something. And so we came down and looked at it, and it's actually a tremendously beautiful place. And Mallorca has this stigma of cheap mass tourism for Europeans. I guess it's similar to some places in northern Mexico for the US people. So I never set foot on Mallorca before for like 27 years or something. And then within the next 2 years, I went there 5 times, only to shoot lots of deep water solo and Chris Sharma there. And it's a good vibe, this deep water solo shooting, because you're always hanging over the ocean or you're in a boat looking at the wall. So it's quite interesting. and it's a very, very close community, because this deep water soloing is actually very scary. You know, even me hanging from a rope when you're these 30-meter high cliffs, when you're hanging there and you see the big waves crashing below you, and at some point I remember there was a moment when Magnus was hanging 1 meter below me, and he really couldn't see the next hold, and he was like, "Damn, dude, like I'm running out of strength here, like." And then he was like, "Seriously, dude, I'll jump." And it was like 28, 29 meters high or something, and just seeing him fall and become smaller and then splashing in the ocean, I mean, it's an intense way to climb, and it's also an intense way to photograph. So, and it's nice and it's warm there, you know, the times when people do deep water solo is when it's nice and warm. So as a photographer, it's really quite chill, because you don't have to ascend much. You know, it's not the big wall where your bicep burns after a couple 100 meters and you just wish to die. It's just dropping in, and in the evening you have a casual pizza and red wine. So Mallorca in that sense is a very, very chill way to photograph, to climb, and to have a good time.
Sweet. I appreciate you, number one, like going there, taking pictures, like sharing it, so like us as people who have never been there can see it and see like its beauty as for much as what we can see for not being there in person. So I appreciate that. Kat, do you think I could ask like that one more question that I had sent you? One more?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. Okay, so speaking of like fear, you had said that you kind of had like a little nervousness sometimes when you're up high, like taking pictures and stuff like that. So for the majority of us who are from Florida, a lot of us have never like experienced anything big wall or anything tall of any sort, comparatively to like what's out there. So like can you like explain like that feeling of being high up, and like when you are in like that like scariness of panicking type thing, how are you able to like combat that? And like also quick question, how is a night on a portaledge? Like little things like that.
I first had my big wall experience in Verdun. It's in the south of France, in the Provence. It's a big canyon. The walls are, I don't know, like 300-400 meters high. Sorry, I don't know the imperial. I hope you are okay with 300-400 meters. Half of Alca.
Yeah, it's significantly taller than like anything that fit on, so we're good.
And the interesting there is that you always, as a climber and as a photographer, you drop in from the top. You know, because usually when you're tackling big walls, you climb up in with the rope team. So your brain has time to adapt to the new situation of the ground getting further and further away. In Verdun, you start at the very top, because there's no access from the bottom, and you, I mean, there is access, but you still access from the top, because a lot of routes don't go all the way to the ground. They start somewhere in the middle of the cliff. So I was nervous, because I was never in a big wall, and then dropping in from the top was like, I was like, ooh, let's see how my brain manages that. Because there's a first for everything, and you never know how your body behaves. So in my experience, as weird as that may sound, as long as I have foot contact on the wall, I'm completely good. When it comes to overhanging parts, it's interesting how the mental game changes completely, at least for me, but I've heard that from other climbers too, which is highly irrational, because your feet touching the wall when you're hanging from a 9mm rope somewhere high up does not help you at all if the rope cuts. Like, it does not help, but it kind of grounds you in the wall. When it comes to these overhanging parts, you're really hanging free, and this gives the body, I don't know, maybe it's this feeling of not being stable on something, that you're just swinging around. That I feel is scary, that I always have to get used to, and it's especially scary when it's in routes where you feel like the route itself is kind of dangerous too. So there was 2 scary moments for me, like really scary moments, I believe, in the in the career so far. One was on the Eiger North Face. It's one of the big mountains in the Alps. And the North Face is, I think, 1,800 meters of vertical. So it's really big, and it has this aura, like so many people have died there. But I was with a very, very, very good team of alpinists, and we got a special permit because there's a railway, like a tramway, what is it called, like these mountain things, is stationed behind the wall, and there is an old boring tunnel where they put out all the rocks from building the tunnel, and so they made the train stop there because this alpinist is so well known, and they dropped us off. But the problem is you don't have time at all to come slowly up into the wall then. But this door opens and you're looking down. It's like 1,500 meters of down, and you're looking up, and there's like another 800 meters of overhanging above you, and stormy, and like I was, whew. And when you're in these overhangs, usually the climbers climb up first. They have your static rope with them. So when they reach the next anchor, they clip your static rope, and then you can start rappelling up on the static rope to the same anchor, just like the second climber follows up. But when it's massively overhanging and it's maybe a 50-meter long pitch, then you're in the situation that once you unclip from the belay where you're currently at, you swing out massively. You know, it's a pendulum swing. And these pendulum swings, when you're 2 kilometers of free in the air, and it's massively overhanging, it can be that you pendulum out like 15 meters away from the wall. And those are moments where I definitely have some videos. I don't look super professional in these moments. I look more like, but yeah, no one has seen them. So these overhanging things are something that is potentially more scary than everything that I can have my foot in. But of course, there's always the risk of rope cutting, and the risk is higher than you might think. I remember in Jordan, I was 1.5 years ago. We were, I think, 200 meters up or something, and I wanted to reach a position that is a little further out of the straight down line. So I started swinging left and right for a couple of times to reach another bolt, and you feel the vibration of the rope as it crosses the rocks on the top. Felt a bit uncomfortable with that, but then when I did the photo and came back and ascended, I looked up and realized that the rope was actually half cut, and that was I actually have that on video because I was wearing a GoPro for a documentary at the time. So that was, I believe, the scariest moment that I ever had, because hanging that high up on half cut rope, you know, it's still 10, 15 meters above you, but you see how the rope is completely like I don't know the English term, when it's burst. And then I think that was the most elegant ascending moves that I've ever did, to not put any additional load on that. And the moment when you put your first ascender over this broken part, that felt very, very relieving. And it took me a couple of days to actually be okay with that situation and to come to terms with that. So so there is dangers involved, even if you like to think that you're with great people. And I mean, it happens. That's part of the game with a bigger walls climbing, that you don't have in that sense when you are sport climbing, I believe.
Sweet. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks,
Sure.
Sam. I know Maria asked to, like, really early on if she could ask a question, so I'm going to send it to her first, and then we can go down our list with Dana and Tyler, and then the rest of you guys.
Sure.
Thank you. Hi. So actually the question is from my sister because she's a photographer. Hi.
Cheers.
Oh, okay. So first of all, thank you, because this conversation has been really, really inspiring for me.
because it's scary when you decide to take photography to a professional level and like to dedicate your life to it. And so as I'm starting to move into this new area, I am wondering, like, would you recommend social media as a good tool for you to show your work to other people? Because there's always this risk that's very high of others stealing your credit, or I don't know, what would you recommend?
Yeah. Well, one thing, thank you for your question. One thing is, don't be afraid of people stealing your work. That is, I feel like you will never be able to stop people from stealing your work. Otherwise, you can never have a portfolio website. You can never have Instagram, which is basically an extended portfolio. Or you can never have your work printed in magazines, because people can multiply that too. So step these copyright part away, because there's also companies that can follow these things. And I got a lot of money in my career actually from companies that stole my photos, and they were sued. So that is quite handy. I can give you a link later on. So this part about copyright, let's ignore that for a moment, at least in my opinion. Social media, I have, like, it is, I think, extremely important. Like I said, like, the photography is only 5 or 10% of what you actually do when you're a photographer. The rest is all the other aspects, like marketing, sales, taxes, legal stuff. So social media is marketing, and if well done, it's I think extremely important. I have never fully committed myself to it, because I see all the downsides to it. The biggest one, I believe, is that it has a certain aesthetic, or it promotes a certain aesthetic that a lot of people like, and you run the risk of copying this aesthetic for the sake of likes and follows. And because these likes and follows is the currency on social media. A lot of people cannot judge if the photo is sort of really good. Like, most people that are on social media are not the editors at National Geographic. So they look at the numbers, and if they see it's been liked 5,000 times, 10,000 times, whatever, then it must be a great photo. So I feel like there is this specific aesthetic on social media, Instagram specifically, that if you do this aesthetic, you have quite a chance to become big, which would, which helps you with the marketing terms. But then again, everything looks the same, and you run the risk of always going to the same places everyone goes. So everyone just stays in the same part and just multiplies and multiplies the same imagery all over again. So that's, I believe, the biggest risk. But if you believe that you can be free of that, if you can still pursue your own idea and your own style without getting too influenced by what is seemingly the successful and good way to do it, then I'd say absolutely go for it, for the marketing part of it. Super important. Not only to have people find you, like, we can ask Patrick. I don't know how you guys found me, but I assume it's somewhere in these areas.
It was.
Okay. And also what I realized is that companies by now, it's the same with modeling, weirdly. Companies by now, when they have the choice between two photographers, and one, they're absolutely the same quality and all, but one photographer has a following of 100,000 and the other one a following of 5,000, or is not on social media, then the person with 100,000 followers will get the job, because they give additional exposure to the brand and to the project. And it's the same with models. So that's an aspect that you don't have to do it. And I see that there is a lot of people out there that you've just usually never heard of, because you don't see their work directly, but that are still very successful, that are nowhere near any kind of social media, but the big agencies know them, because you can still knock on their doors and show them your portfolio, and and you can show the portfolio to the editors of magazines. That nothing of that requires any social media. But generally speaking, if you feel like you can do that without compromising your style of photography, and without being too drawn into it about comparing your work to others, then do it. Then do it. Dot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kat.
Absolutely.
Did this answer your question, or was there another sub question that I forgot?
No, that was it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good.
So Vincent, we are right at 3 o'clock. I don't know that's what the time that we told you, but we do have some people that still have a few questions. I'm going to leave it up to you. Would you prefer that we go ahead and end it now, or would you be okay with answering a couple more questions?
Absolutely. I hate this here. No, of course, go on. No, absolutely. I'm here for you. So go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to send it over to Dana. Dana, you go ahead.
Hi. Thanks
Hi,
for
Dana.
thanks for doing this and talking with all of us and taking the time out of your day. We really do appreciate that.
Sure.
So my question is, you said that you are currently living in a van in Chile. So does living in a van during a pandemic kind of make you wish that you picked something more stable and traditional? Or even knowing what you know now, would you still do the same thing?
I am actually extremely happy that we made the choice for this trip around the world in our car right now, because on the surface, of course, we are stuck here. We cannot proceed with our travels with the itinerary that we had planned. So it's easy to have the first reaction of, shit, we are so unlucky. But if you look at it, I don't know specifically what the situation is in the US, but what I've seen in the news, it's quite similar politically to Germany. As a photographer in these days, like for the last 2 months, I would not have been able to do any kind of project because it always involves traveling, it always involves meeting people. So it is technically impossible to do a project now if I was still living in Hamburg. And another aspect is that so many companies are on the brink of getting bankrupt right now, that the first thing companies stop usually is expenditures that they deem not immediately necessary, which includes photography and media creation. So I believe maybe for the next, definitely for the next couple months, but maybe even for the next year, until things have gotten back to normal. It's not an easy time to be self-employed in the creative world, at least talking about Germany. Germany has put a big fund. I could get something like $10,000-12,000 from the government as an emergency rescue for all the self-employed people, which would otherwise all be bankrupt right now and needing social welfare. So the idea that we have decided to travel and be in the van and be self-sustained. We don't need to work. We don't need any income for the foreseeable future. That is actually we can be very very thankful for the situation that we are in. Being in a van in general, like if you would still be dependent on working, as I said, you have less time in your day to actually get work done, and it's definitely less comfortable. It's often glorified, but it's of course less comfortable than a bigger apartment where you have all amenities. So you have to be okay with that. But what was the point that I was trying to get to? I lost that point that I was trying to get to. But us in this specific situation, us now, we are happy that we are where we are, and that we can ride off this wave, stuck here in the middle of nowhere. I can show you around a bit, just to because otherwise we would be would be stuck in some quarantine, either in Sao Paulo or in Hamburg, basically not leaving the flat for weeks and weeks and weeks. So here, I don't know if you can see, but so we actually are quite lucky with that we can just move around here, and there is just no one except for, can you see? I can't, except for the car and
Yeah.
and there's the lake where we get our fresh water from, super clean and clear. We have the solar on the roof, so so we're completely independent basically of any external sources except for food. So that is, I think we are in a very what's it called? Very, very good situation, generally speaking.
Awesome. Thank you.
I know you probably can't see our faces, but everybody was super pleased to be able to see your surroundings just now. So thanks for taking us on a tour. Let's see, Tyler, you got a question. You go for it.
Hi, thanks for talking to us today.
Sure.
I got my photographer friend to send me a question since Sam asked my question. Great question, Sam. So how do you protect your photography gear as you're doing a climb? Like, how do you make sure it's not gonna like break when it hits any rocks or stuff like that?
Yeah, there's two parts in that. First one is everything is completely insured, like to 100% of the new value. So I don't need to worry about any financial loss if anything goes wrong. That's a big thing that I would recommend to anyone. I'm sure these insurances are available in the US as well. But obviously, that does not help you when you're in the middle of nowhere and you actually destroy your camera gear because you're dependent on it. So obviously I try to not destroy it. And I never managed to actually destroy it. There's lots of scratches and dents and everything, but the equipment is tougher than you would usually think.
Nice.
I do not protect from water pretty much at all. So in climbing, the biggest risk is actually the camera or the lens smashing against the rock. So I have it's from a company like Oddly. It's a little bag that I have attached with the binder on the harness. That is for the moments when I ascend or descend, and then I take the camera out and I have the camera attached to a 120 centimeter Dyneema sling that is also fixed to the harness. So sort of worst case, whatever happens, I can drop everything and nothing falls to the ground, which I believe is very important because it can always happen that you have to quickly let go and use your hands for other things. And that happened a couple of times, which can be hard on the equipment. And one of the times was on Mallorca during deep water soloing, where I had to quickly get out of the way. So I just dropped the camera, but I dropped it a little bit too far behind me. So when it's connected to a 120 centimeter sling, it kind of swings around. So I dropped it behind me, and then 1.5 meters below me, I heard a big smash as it as it crashed into the rock, and some rock was falling off. But the camera was all right. So generally speaking, while I'm ascending or descending, I usually have it protected in the case. But yeah, sometimes when it's safe, I also just have it around the what's it called, with the neck strap around the neck. But the neck strap is attached with a Dyneema cord to the harness, so that nothing can go wrong.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
Thank you. Chris Schick, you've got one. Go ahead.
Yes, I want to say first thank you for doing this for us, and doing this call.
Thank you.
So I am I'm a film major currently, and so I think I kind of relate a bit to what you were saying about how it's not necessarily like a 9-to-5 corporate sort of job most of the time, and it can be really hard to get started and get noticed, whether making a film or with photography. So I was more just curious, like, what do you consider, like, what was your first big sort of like photography gig that that you think really was like a step forward for you, like to getting more like big projects afterward?
I think what got me forward the most was actually in the beginning unpaid work, portfolio work that actually shows people what you're capable of. Because oftentimes commercial work, as I believe, is aesthetically and creatively far less pleasing than if you and the climber, or you and your subject, have full control about what you want to do. In filming, it might also come that financial limitations, you know, if you want to make big productions or something, if you are going for the big marketing, big advertisement, then it costs one hell of a lot to rent all this high-end big gear and camera cars and whatever. So I don't know about your background, what you're trying to achieve, but generally speaking, when I talk with advertising agencies, they usually like to see a combination of some commercial projects that you've done, just so that you can show to them that you're able to work in a commercial environment, because it has these specific kind of works, you know, with production companies, with the advertising agency, how everything comes together, that you know how to do that. You're not the sort of super artist that it's only doing history. But they are most interested in your personal style, and this personal style of yours comes when you do individual projects, like if you do what's it called, like free projects for your own yourself. So I believe that is the most interesting, and the commercial projects just come with that. I have very few photos from commercial projects on my website and Instagram, because I usually find them quite boring. And because it's always stuck in a production schedule, there's lots of people on set, oftentimes it's video and photo at the same time, so you can, you know, you don't have full control over things. You have to work in a big team, and they all have to do their stuff, so it's always a big compromise. But when you're working on your own personal project, and really do it absolutely just like you've planned to do. And I know from a lot of DOPs from my friends is that actually you are able to rent equipment from the big rental companies, at least in Europe, but I'm sure it's the same in the US, for very, very little money, maybe even for free, when you tell them, hey, you are a beginner, you just finished university, you're working on your portfolio. Oftentimes we get the big ARRI Alexas and the big ARRI lights and all. You get that for free often, but for a super reduced rate, because these guys in the rental companies know that you will be loyal to them when they helped you out in the beginning of your career. And if you stick to them, you know, when you have your first bigger paid jobs, that you should have the ethics that you obviously rent with them then for the normal price. But it's a give and take. So oftentimes in the beginning of your career, these rental houses, rental companies, they give you massive discounts, especially if you're young, so that you can do your little production for your portfolio. So you can actually get acquainted with the big ARRI cameras and have their quality on set, even for very little money.
Okay, thank you very much.
Did that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
Perfect. All right, we have a few more. I'm going to send it over to Sam Harden.
Hi guys. Like everyone's been saying, like, thanks so much for joining us today, and thanks for letting us go over. I know that we all have like a lot of questions, so thanks for your patience.
Yeah, of course.
So you mentioned earlier it kind of being hard sometimes to keep up either mentally or like physically with the people you've been photographing, like high grade climbers. Have you ever felt like your photography has been limited by your ability to keep up, and like, do you have any workarounds for this or any tips that you'd have?
I feel like my photography has not taken any kind of negative impact by that. What might have is my my personal desires. You know, it is the idea to be on a like the before mentioned Trango Tower somewhere in Pakistan. It was like, hey, that could be cool, you know. But I also know that I would have to work really, really hard, both to broaden my skill set, but just as well, like at least from the current state, to just have the physical abilities to deal with this. But photographically, there is not much difference from if you're at 5,000 meter or if you're at 2,000 meters. You know, your creative possibilities and abilities of where to put yourself in the wall or just sleeping in the wall with a portalage. I think that was one of the questions earlier on as well that we forgot. That is the same. And so from a creative, artistic or craftsman point of view, I feel like the lack of these abilities has not stopped me in any ways. It's only my personal curiosity that I feel like when I'm 80 years old and looking back at my life, I'm 34 now, so if I want to do that in any sort of way, I would have to really start working on that super highly concentrated, because it will only, you know, windows close after a certain while or at a certain age. But I'm pretty sure that by now I feel like most of these climbing things I have met most of the, or at least so many of those big names and inspiring people that I had hoped to meet and talk with them and captured some of their passion. That I feel like for me, climbing photography at the moment, it is, I feel like I've done what I personally want to do in climbing photography creatively and from storytelling point of view. Because in the end, if you look at it, the narrative is basically always the same. It's always human against nature, objective, struggle, failure, coming back, conquering it, being passionate and humble about it. And if you ask me, I find that a bit boring after a while.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Sure.
All right, Liberty, it's your turn.
Hi, thank you again for just sharing your story with us. I know I found it really inspiring and I've learned a lot from it. But I guess what I want to know is, do you feel that minimizing your life materialistically has maximized it through your professional life and your personal life, and would you kind of recommend it to others?
Absolutely. Interesting question. I'm currently reading a book. It's been quite a bestseller, so I'm sure some of you have read that too. I think in the US it's called Homo Sapiens.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's very interesting because we are living in this world where from being born to dying mostly, our political or the framework of what we live in does not change all that much. So it is sort of the capitalist world, the framework within which you work, you gain money, you get your car, all these things. And within this belief system, having money to buy things as the biggest satisfaction for most people in their lives actually is, if you look at it from a little further away, is actually quite sad, because if the biggest satisfaction that you get in life is to consume something that actually you might not really need, but that marketing told you that you should have the desire to need it, and that you spend a couple of $1,000s on only after a week to realize that you're not happier than you were before, and that you should only work more in order to buy the thing that costs $10,000 instead of $5,000. That is something I feel like if you can get past that, which is extremely hard to do, because in the first world everyone basically lives in the same framework. But if you can get past that, and if you can get to the point where you say, I don't need this new car just because it is a little more shiny, or if it goes to 100 a little faster, but instead I use the money for experiences, or to become a better human, or maybe actually I don't need all that money anymore because I don't want to buy all these things. Instead, I can work a little less and read more or something. Then I believe in the end you might be a happier person. But it's very, very hard to actually get out of this belief system, because we are trained to be in this myth of consumption basically from the moment we were born. But if you're able to do that, and living in a van to some degree actually helps doing that, then that's great, because actually, you know, even if I get offers via email about this and this new light and all, I'm like, first of all, I'm down here in Chile, so I could not receive it. Second of all, I have no place to store it. I'm just like, I am technically, is that the word? Well, I'm even if I wanted to consume something right now, I could not, because I have no space to store any of that. And that actually shows you that you don't need it. My life would not be happier if there would be an Amazon parcel coming in 3 times a week right now. I think it makes me happier to see actually and to experience how these farmers work here with tractors that are from the 1970s and that are being kept in shape and kept working and kept working and kept working. That is something that inspires me more than consuming products that are not designed to last for longer than a couple of years, maybe. So if you are able in your life to actually minimize your consumption, then I believe it frees up your head definitely to do things. My dad once said to me, the biggest mistake he did in his life was to raise the standards of living, the expenditure, what's it called, analogous, or like in parallel, synced with the rise in income, because a higher living standard, which is true if you ask scientists, does make you happier only to a very, very certain degree, and from then on it stays the same. But going down from a higher standards to less is actually a big bump you have in your life. So if you manage to not get used to too high living standards because you have the big paycheck now, I believe actually frees you up with choices that you have in your life. Because if you don't have the big mortgage on the big house or the big credit on the big car, that makes your choices easier, because maybe you work for 5 years at Apple and you earn one hell of a lot of money and you have these big mortgages, but then you can't get out of the cycle. You are never able to leave the Silicon Valley payment group, because you have all these payments that you have to come up with month by month. So if your desire is to do something completely different, you can't. So if you stay, I mean, you don't have to be minimalist, but if you consume in a reflected way, then I believe it makes you happier in the long run.
That's very reassuring to hear. I really appreciate your insight on that, and I will definitely use that to try and convince my boyfriend to move into a van with me and travel the world.
Yeah, please do.
Well, I'm going to pass it over now to Vince. I think that he probably resonates with what you just said a lot, so it's perfect timing to give it over to him.
Cool. Hey, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate you being here and talking with us. I'm looking into pursuing, and I'm currently pursuing environmental documentary, video storytelling. So I think it's super cool to have you here talking about your experiences. And I definitely had 2 questions here, but I'm just gonna focus on one. And I was curious if I've had this feeling before, and I want to know if you, because you've traveled and also done kind of documentary photography, if you've had this feeling as well. I'm wondering, have you ever felt like your experiences are overshadowed by seeking an image with your camera?
are overshadowed by what?
By seeking an image with your camera. So like seeking to photograph this person or this scene, you know, does that ever take away from your from maybe like what you're getting out of that?
Absolutely. I remember when I was younger, I used to say I only experience a place when I look through a camera, but from my perspective now, I feel like having imagery in the back of your mind non-stop that you want to produce really makes you so nervous and just prevents you from calming down and to just dive into the situation and experience them as a human, that it can be really a problem, because I have this productivity desire, and I have a very hard time to just sit back and say, you know, now we'll just have a talk with the farmers or something. I always feel like I need to produce something. I need to do something meaningful with my life, proceed with a career or something. So there's always this part in me that is nervous about making something out of a situation. And I believe that is really not good, because if you actually sit down and breathe out and say, I will just experience this for myself as a human first, and then later on I will photograph this, that it would give a fuller experience, or definitely experience that is 100% concentrated on the moment, because when I have all the creative thoughts in my head, or all the things that I feel like I need to produce, or that I need to serve, then I'm never 100% in the current situation, maximum 80% or whatever, and 20% is my brain trying to scan the situation for what video could I make out of this, what scenes, what storytelling, what photograph. And it gets harder and harder when you actually have multiple outlets, I believe. If your only job is to make a 7-photo story for a magazine, then you only have this in mind. But for this trip here currently, we have the situation that I want to take photos that are just my own passion projects. I want to take photos in the long run that are Instagram social media compatible, which is not necessarily the same as the passion photos that I have. And there is a book project for National Geographic Germany, and these are all very different kind of photos that wherever I am, I have in the back of my mind to see. And also there's the YouTube channels with some behind the scenes in the making. So there's always the feeling that I have too much things going on in my brain to actually exhale and to just enjoy the moment. And that is something that I'm very happy that we got to this forced stop here, because now there is, we stopped the sort of influx from new situations that I produce. Now it's time to actually process all the things that have accumulated over the last couple of weeks, and also the lockdown like this, staying in one place, and you know, we just looked it up, and it's now May. Our plan was already to be in Brazil, in the Pantanal by May, which is 7,000 kilometers from where we are. And just the idea to have traveled 7,000 kilometers now seems ridiculous. So this slowing down and giving things time to develop is not what big productions and big production companies and all want you to do, or what that is something you cannot do when you're working in the bigger advertisement. But if you are able to do your passion projects on your own without an agency or a production company slapping your back, or a budget in the back of your mind that you feel like you need to fulfill, then I feel like, especially using this moment of lockdown now to come to terms with what you really want to do is actually a good thing, at least for me. But that might differ for other people. But I fully understand that you feel like you have lots of things in your head and you can't concentrate fully on fully dive into the moment, if I understood you correctly.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for answering that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, I think we've maybe reached our last one for this discussion so far. So I'm going to send it over to Miguel for him to take us out with his last question.
Yeah. So thank you very much for your time, Vincent. And then we've probably seen all your like amazing adventure photos with all the like climbers, but as well as these pictures with climbers, I've seen many landscape pictures, and they're very stunning. And so my question is, do you feel like a change in your mentality when you're taking landscape pictures and when you're removing the person from the photo, like there's no people in these pictures, and just concentrating on nature? And how do you feel how do you try to get people to connect to these pictures even with no people in them?
Yeah. I think almost all landscapes that I've shot have been taken in the course of expeditions. You know, it's the landscapes, the backdrops of where these undertakings take place. So I feel like with landscape photography in general, it is something that I don't pursue. I don't go out to say I take 2 weeks just to photograph landscapes. Now, landscapes is not my my driving force in photography at the moment, but I'm super thankful. I have a very open eye. You know, it does not matter if it's alpinism, climbing, or if it's cultural, political work that is happening in the outdoor area. When one of the most the big rewarding things is actually that photography gets you into these situations where nature, with all its for lack of a better word, epicness, strikes you. And then of course I really love to photograph and to capture the feeling that I have in this particular moment. But I'm not a landscape photographer, so that's the first thing I would like to say to that. With landscape photography, I feel like there's this big thing. It first of all does not really lend itself to any kind of social media, really, because it needs the bigger canvas to, at least that's my opinion. So a lot of the landscape work that we see these days, because obviously we go to Instagram much more often than we go to a museum or an art exhibition, which is something that I really, really recommend doing. And I myself do that way too little. I need to remind myself all the time, because when you're in the social media bubble, you feel like that's the world of photography and that's the aesthetics. But the sort of real arts, or what is considered by a lot of people, the arts outside of social media, is not happening there. So if you go to these exhibitions, that is one of the big things. The problem with social media is that, I think I said that to one of your fellow students before, there is this high risk in social media to reproduce certain styles and themes that are working. Right. Which in the realm of landscapes and social media is usually small person, big landscape. There is a reason why that works, because it's psychologically interesting. You have this feeling of connection to the person there. Psychologists have done quite a lot of studies about why that is, because you project yourself to be in the position and blah, blah, blah. But still, I feel like 90% of all landscapes works that are out there in social media is basically that. And the more epic it is, the more likes there are, which reaffirms other people to feel like that's the way to go. So, to give that another pole, I believe it's very important to actually stay away from the phone and to go to museums and exhibitions to actually see what other people understand of landscape photography, which oftentimes is something that is so far away from what you see on social media, and also something that needs more time for you to be open-minded to actually watch it, because I mean, we have like half an hour or a half a second or a second of attention span when we scroll through an Instagram feed or something. So if it's not epic immediately, we scroll past it. And lots of the big works, like if you go to, I don't know, big photo exhibitions, if you would just see them on the small screen, you would be like, yeah, this doesn't give me anything. But if you're standing in front of a 2-meter printed and you're spending 5 minutes of your life to actually look at it, then that's a different kind of photography. And I think you have to know for yourself what audience you want to cater. Do you want to go more towards the social media, which is more about epicness and effects, or do you want to go more the traditional route, be that fine art or art actually? And they have different aesthetics and a different way to photograph these things, because you will usually not find a small person in a big landscape in a photo exhibition.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Vincent, for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. I'm sure I speak for everybody here when I say that everything you had to say was really insightful and inspiring for us, whether it was about photography or the cultural aspects of your travels or anything like that. We really do appreciate it. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for letting us go a little bit over time here. I'm sure everyone appreciated answering the questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was really cool. And to everyone that was joining, good luck. And I mean, as cheesy as that sounds, like, pursue whatever you have in mind and don't let people push you away from it. So then I think it'll work out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And for everyone in the chat, I recommend you come back to these every Sunday. We're going to be having these campfire chats. Next week's theme is oceans. Vincent, you're welcome to join us as well. We'll drop you a link if you want to come and listen in.
I was about to say, please get me the link too. I'm not a student anymore, but if I'm in any kind of connection, then that would be awesome.
Absolutely. We will definitely send that out. Thanks again for joining us, and I think we're going to wrap it up. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
And for everyone that might have any other questions or something, just drop me a direct message on Instagram. So much hate about social media here, but no, but totally, I would like to help you guys whenever there's questions. So just shoot a message, and it might take a couple of days for me to reply, because oftentimes I don't have any connection here. But when I'm here at the beach, I'll make sure to reply.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool.
All
Have a
right,
good time, guys. Ciao.